If you haven't noticed from my growing number of plants, I adore starting plants from cuttings. It's such an easy, low maintenance way to start plants. Today, we're going to double our tomato plants by making a bunch of cuttings. If you're new to doing cuttings, basically you are taking a branch from an existing plant and recreating the plant from that branch. The new plant is basically a clone of the original plant. This might sound kind of super sci-fi, but it's really a simple process. The cool thing is that tomatoes are perfect candidates for cuttings. So find your most prolific, healthiest tomato plant and let's get to duplicating it. So the first step in doing a cutting is picking the right tomato plant. You want to pick your healthiest plant. You also want to pick a tomato variety that is an indeterminate tomato and not a determinate tomato. That's because indeterminate tomatoes continue to grow and produce while determinate set fruit all at once and then they stop. This is a great place to talk about how you got this fabulous plant to start with. Growing tomatoes from seed can be difficult sometimes, so there is nothing wrong with picking up some transplants at the nursery. Transplants can be expensive, so I'm very selective when buying them, but things like tomatoes and peppers are ones I never really feel any kind of way about buying them, because the plant will pay for itself pretty easily. Not only that, but by taking cuttings from it, you can increase your return on investment even more. We're going to start with my Marzono. We also have a red pear, I have a pink Oxford, and one other one that I can't remember and I forgot to label, so that will be a surprise one. But we're going to take suckers from each one of these plants. Now, normally in the fall, I remove the suckers from my plants because I know that by removing the suckers, you can push the plant to produce more tomatoes in a shorter amount of time. If you leave the suckers, it will take longer to get tomatoes, but you will get a larger volume of tomatoes. In fall, I have a very short window to grow, so normally I take my suckers off. But because I knew that I was going to be doing some cuttings, what I did was I removed a lot of the suckers from the bottom and in between, and I let a few of them grow out because I wanted to take cuttings from them. You want your suckers to be about 6 inches long. Anything smaller than that is probably not going to take. Anything larger than that, it's going to struggle as well. 6 inches is typically the magic number. So you might be asking, what is a sucker? So let me show you. When tomato plants grow, they have a leader stem. That grows upwards along the trellis here. This is the top of that leader stem. And it comes all the way down to the base of the stem that comes out of the ground. Then you're going to see 3 different parts of the plant. One is like a normal leaf, like this guy right here. Then you're going to see the flower clusters. So if we take a look at this one, this right here is a flower cluster. Next up is the sucker. The sucker grows in between a leaf branch and the main stem. So the sucker grows in between one of the leaf branches and the main stem. You can probably barely see this sucker here, but it is in a V shape and it has a tiny little plant growing in between that elbow or crotch area of the main stem and the leaf. So usually when they're small like this, I just take them off, and that helps the plant focus its energy on growing the tomatoes. But I let a few of them get pretty far along. So let me find one. This sucker right here, you can see there is a leaf, you can see the main stem, and then you have a plant growing out of in between that main line and that leaf branch. This is the sucker. If you're not sure which one is the sucker on your tomato plant, wait for it to get a little bit bigger and you should start to see new leaf branches, which is what this one has right here, and some tiny, tiny flower clusters. That tells you it's a sucker because flowers only come off the main stem or the suckers. So because I see a little leaf cluster starting right here, I know for a fact that this is a sucker. Suckers are basically new tomato plants growing off the side of the main tomato plant. If you let them continue, they will produce more tomatoes. And like I mentioned earlier, the downside of letting them grow is that they're going to restrict airflow, they're going to take nutrients away, and it's going to take longer to get your tomatoes. So when you leave suckers on the plant, you're allowing the plant to grow lots of new leaves, lots of new tomatoes, and it causes the ripening of the existing tomatoes to take longer. So since I'm in fall with a short growing season, I usually remove most of these suckers to push that fruit forming on the main stem to ripen quicker. But the cuttings we're going to be taking will be for my spring tomato plants. Normally when I grow tomatoes in spring, I don't take the suckers off at all since they can continue to ripen all the way into summer. So I really don't have any need to rush them. I'd rather get the volume. Now once you've located your sucker, you're going to clip it off as close to the plant as possible. Then I'm going to remove the lower leaves. I'm just going to be leaving the growing tip up top. I'll now dip the cut part of the stem into honey. You can also use rooting hormone if you have it, but I never do. Either one of these helps to encourage roots to form on the new cutting. Honey also has a natural antibacterial property, so it should help keep the cutting healthy. Now that we got that honey on there, wipe a little bit of the excess off. Now we're going to push the cutting deep down into a pot as far as you can. You basically want it to hit the bottom of the pot and then back up just a little bit. I usually start with this size cup, rather on the small side of the pot, just because they will be easier to move when we get a frost. Then I can pot them up as they get bigger, keeping them in just a little bit larger of a pot as we go along. The smaller pots will also probably slow down their growth, but I'm okay with that since I have 3 months before I plan on putting these plants in the ground. Now we just need to water it in really deeply. Push the soil down around the cutting to make sure that it's holding in place really well. Then all we're going to do is find a shady spot for the first week or two and let it hang out there. The cutting needs time to focus on developing roots, so we don't want it stressed out from direct sun. After a couple of weeks, I'll start checking them to see if any root growth has started to occur. Once I can see some new leaves forming or some roots around this cup, then I'll move them into a sunnier spot in my yard to hang out until it's time to transplant. You can also choose to just keep potting them up until you have them in a pot that is about 5 to 10 gallon size. A 5-gallon size bucket are great options for tomatoes. I'm taking as many cuttings as I can to reduce the number of suckers on the fall tomato plants, but also because cuttings don't always make it. The success rate of cuttings can vary a lot, so I always take as many as I can because I'd rather have more plants than I need than less. This is a perfect time of year for me to grow cuttings because we are headed into winter, so the plants I currently have will eventually die out once we get our first frost. Where I live, we don't get a lot of frost, but we get a few, and there are enough that it's difficult to keep our tomato plants alive through the winter. Until then, I'm going to keep them in the pots, and if we do get some cold weather, all I do is move them inside or in my shed to keep them protected. Because I'm starting them so early, I'll have to pot these guys up at least a couple times before I get them in the ground. But that will be fine. They will slow down in growing once the weather cools down, so I probably will only have to pot them up 2 or 3 times at most. If you're interested in other types of plants that you can take cuttings from, check out this video here.